Hello and welcome to episode 76, and for those of you who may have thought we'd shaken off the Game & Watch series, well, perhaps today's presentation might just surprise you. So, please welcome an early Nintendo handheld game, with an LCD screen called Computer Maj-jong. Being first offered for sale in the spring of 1983, this handheld was only ever sold in Japan, and exact sales figures sadly appear to be now lost to time. Given the production code of MJ-8000, the instructions booklet is a close facsimile of its stablemate, the Game & Watch. But before we dive headlong into this fascinating and somewhat obscure games console, let's look back at last week's photo mystery quiz we hear on our channel called, What in the World? The red Nintendo logo loomed large in this close-up shot. We also see several screw holes are visible. The styrofoam insert was just recognizable as well, so did you know what it was? It's the orange variant of the classic, and somewhat iconic Nintendo Zapper, a legendary light gun that popularized the shooting genome. This one was shipped as part of the front-loading console, the Nintendo Entertainment System, which came bundled with certain early launch edition boxes. Our viewer, who goes by the identity of Jade Lockpicker, was 100% correct and clearly identified this item in our weekly challenge, which was really awesome. So, back to the game of Mah-jong and Nintendo's interest in it. The most obvious version to start with is the traditional and physical tile variant. That's what most toy makers made initially. Nintendo made many different versions, much like they did with their early playing cards. But hot on the heels of today's star in focus, Nintendo launched a version for the brand new Mega Machine, the Family Computer, or as it's better known, the Famicom, in 1983. Later this game was ported over to its sister console, the Nintendo Entertainment System, with a Hong Kong version seen here. And by 1989, the desire to replicate the popularity of our two previously mentioned home games consoles into a portable games handheld, with interchangeable carts, was met by the launch of the legendary Game Boy, and with it came a brand new version of Mah-jong. The following year, 1990 saw the release of the 16-bit system called the Super Famicom, which was named Super Nintendo Entertainment System in the West, and of course a new and improved Mah-jong was released for the system. Then later in 1996, the new Nintendo 64 arrived, and with it, you guessed it, another new version of Mah-jong. Arguably the best version of this game was to be found on the GameCube's DX2 offering, in 2001. In 2006, the newly released Wii console offered up a hybrid game that mixed up Mah-jong and Solitaire. The game was warmly received, however the follow-up console had to rely on a downloadable content version, likely due to its short life and low-level games catalog which arrived in 2012. In Mah-jong 300, there are plenty of different layouts. In fact, there's over 100 layouts in the basic mode alone, and then there are all the different degrees of difficulty levels plus some alternative gameplays. And Mah-jong, Cub 3D, did what it said on the label, and that was to give us a delightful 3D version. And the Switch system also has numerous Mah-jong titles. All of this history simply underscores the prevailing and continuing popularity of Mah-jong, a popularity that predates any gaming console. While not very popular in the West, Mah-jong demanded a more sophisticated interface and display, over and above that offered by the stablemate Game & Watch series. As you can see here, the devices displays the delicate use of the LCDs in a dot matrix pattern to replicate the various Mah-jong symbols. And if you contrast that with the simple block-style sprites, used in all the original Game & Watch range, the difference could not be more stark. Sadly, we would be forced to wait an incredible 6 further years to see the dot matrix display rise up and fulfill its earlier obvious potential. Clearly the original Game Boy, launched in 1989, had the advantage of shades in its palette, but by and large, it was the same display technology of what was used in today's star in focus. Computer Maj-jong is a Nintendo handheld video game, and it was released around the same time as the famous Nintendo Game & Watch range of handhelds. However, it's not considered part of the series despite bearing many similarities such as an LED screen, portability and identical control buttons. The game was clearly a whole bunch more complicated than most of the simple Game & Watches, not least of all because it boasted a total of 20 controls and 2 additional main switches. Something else that is often attributed to the Game Boy is the ability to link 2 handhelds together and play a multiplayer game. Again, this function was standard with the Computer Maj-jong console, only requiring a link cable, which was available as an optional accessory, together with a worthy challenger. Although this is designed as a portable handheld, the device required 4 AA pencil-style batteries, and it is a hungry beast. And a mains adapter was another accessory that was available to ensure the supply of batteries was tolerable. The size of the game is around 24 centimeters long, by 8 centimeters high, and it is 2.5 centimeters thick. So, roughly the thickness of a multi-screen Game & Watch, with a similar height, but likely twice as long. When scoring a Yakuman, a player's chances of winning the game dramatically increase, akin to say a full house in poker for example. The abundance of these little, cream-colored, oval rubberized buttons, should be obvious to anyone familiar with the Game & Watch series, or even for that matter the star of last week's episode, the Bass Mate. As they were a staple component, for the 80s handhelds produced and sold by Nintendo. And while perhaps grounded in the Game & Watch era, the device shares much more DNA with the Game Boy, albeit a 6-year gap, but in both innovation and technology, it simply must have been a template for much of its development at Nintendo's R&D1's division. The link port is protected by a sliding cover, and is situated on the top of the handheld next to the AC adapter jack. When we take a look at the back of the game, we see the battery door. And as previously mentioned, it runs on 4 AA batteries. There is also a serial number. This is very reminiscent of the type used by the Game & Watch series. Well, that is nearly all we have for today, but before we sign off, let's challenge our viewers to this week's photo quiz question we call What in the World? And here it is. If you know, or think you know what it is, then please feel free to guess in the comments section below. If not, then join us next week for the grand reveal. Well, we really hope you enjoyed today's show. If you did, we'd really appreciate a thumbs up, even consider a subscription to our channel, but mostly, we're just glad you're here with us today. Thank you so much.